This is Do Good and Do Well, the podcast for people who want to make a positive difference in the world without losing themselves in the process. I'm Sarah Fox, and in this podcast, I'll be sharing stories from social and creative entrepreneurs and leaders to help inspire you to do good and do well. Hello and welcome to today's episode. I have with me today Astrid Korin. Astrid is an accredited transformative executive coach. She's passionate about putting the human back into leadership and works with leaders and teams to help them connect deeply with themselves and each other so that they can thrive and build successful, sustainable businesses. She has 20 years' experience working with senior leaders all over the world, including Vietnam, South Africa, Ghana, Brunei, and the UK. And prior to becoming a coach, she led an international consultancy business serving public and commercial clients. It was such a pleasure to talk to Astrid. We really dig into this topic of people pleasing. What is it? How does it show up? What can we do about it? Unfortunately, the answer isn't straightforward, but there are things that you can do. So I really hope that you find this a useful episode. If you have any thoughts, comments, anything that resonates with you, come and find me on LinkedIn. Come and talk to me about it. Would love to hear from you. And yeah, enjoy this conversation all about people pleasing. Hello, Astrid, and welcome to the Do Good and Do Well podcast. How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks, Sarah. It's so good to be here and to see you. It's sunny where I am. I don't know what it's like for you.
It is beautiful. I went for a walk with the dog this morning and it was glorious. It just makes such a difference to how you're feeling. Maybe spring has sprung. Who knows? I was thinking earlier that when we were talking about what to discuss today, we had that list of things we could talk about. The thing that jumped out to me was the big people pleasing question. How do we stop people pleasing so much? And what is it? And how does it show up? And I think the reason why that popped out to me was one, I used to be a massive, gigantic people pleaser. I now describe myself as a recovering people pleaser, although it does still show up. I'm able to notice it a bit more. And also, as a coach, that often comes up in my coaching conversations, people noticing that they can't quite make decisions or trying to keep the peace, trying to make everyone happy. And that's having a detrimental impact on them. So it shows up in my coaching. It also, I've noticed as well, I'm a coach supervisor, and actually it can show up in that space as well in terms of coaches wanting to please their clients. And for this conversation, we're going to talk specifically about leaders, although all of this will be relevant to anyone who finds themselves in this situation. My work is around social change and social justice and making the world a better place. And I think that often shows up for people who really care and want to do this stuff. To get us started then, in your experience, what are those sort of common signs of people pleasing? What behaviours do show up?
Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so I think all of the ways in which you've already mentioned, I've experienced those myself. I see them in the coaching space. I experience them as a coach. It's a lot of the stuff that I take to supervision. So yeah, as you say, it can pop up almost anywhere and in any parts of life, really. They can show up in your community, with friends, with family. And that's what I love about this topic and about many of the topics that I'm curious about in terms of leadership is that a lot of them have roots in what's it like to be human. And that's why I'm passionate about coaching leaders as humans and why it's so important to take off the layers of the role, the system, the setting and the environment to take it back to what it is to be human, be the crux of some of the major challenges they face daily. It's great to be here to talk about this topic. Your question was, how does it show up? What are the signs?
Yeah, how do we know that we are engaging in people pleasing behaviour?
It's not as easy as we might think because there's a lot of nuance. Sometimes leaders have to go over and beyond to accommodate, to ensure that people are feel valued and safe and listened to and heard and all of that. And sometimes that can be absolutely the right thing to do. And sometimes it can be coming from a place of overextending that's more in service of the person, the leader, than it is in service of the other. So I think challenges in saying no are always a bit of a telltale sign. How hard do you find it to say no, even when you know in your gut that you really want to say no? You mentioned decision making, shows up there quite a lot. The ability to make quite difficult decisions that not everybody's going to like and how to communicate those. Some of my clients feel a bit paralyzed around that, or they push it back, or they try and delay, or they try sometimes and find a compromise, sometimes for good reason, but sometimes that also dilutes the purpose of the decision or the intervention or whatever it is that they want to change because they're trying to seek a compromise where everybody will be happy. And of course, that isn't an impossibility, particularly in leadership. So those are really quite external um, signs that you can notice that other people can notice in you. But there's also the kind of the internal dialogue that can tell you a lot about whether or not you're people pleasing. The overthinking and ruminating on conversations. It can sound a lot like the inner critic, actually, the people pleaser parts, if you think about them in terms of different parts of ourselves.
You just reminded me of the many times that I've been out with friends, for example, and there's been WhatsApp messages at the end saying, "Oh, I hope I didn't talk too much," or "Maybe I shouldn't have said that," and you lie awake thinking, "Oh, did I overshare? Did I overstep? Oh, what do they think of me?"
Exactly that. I would pay attention to the inner dialogue as much as the decisions and the actions that you might be taking or holding back from taking.
Mhm.
I think the other big one that strikes me is the difficulty in giving and receiving feedback. So, quite often, if we have people pleasing tendencies, we will really struggle to give honest, critical feedback, timely, honest, critical feedback, because many things can happen. But one can be the intention of having the conversation and preparing
Mhm.
conversation. But then the next day it doesn't feel quite so important and the person's in a good mood, relationships seem okay, and you think maybe it was just a one off or there are other priorities and you brush it under the carpet until it comes back. And that's quite often what happens with underperformance. And then you get to a place where you are having a difficult conversation because you can't avoid it anymore. People are left thinking,
Mm.
why didn't you just tell me as we were going through that these were little things that accumulated and added up and now there's nothing that I can do about it? Or quite often that comes from the leader's own fears of having the conversation and perhaps upsetting someone or, rocking the boat. And that can also show up in how we receive feedback. So if we are a people pleaser, the very idea that we have upset someone or we've done something wrong or we've underperformed or we've let someone down. Oh, my God, I'm feeling it. Like even those words, I was like, oh, God.
I need to sit down. It feels really painful sometimes, that feeling of, "Oh, I've let someone down," and because I guess it's around safety, isn't it? It's that sense of I'm not safe unless I'm making sure everyone around me is happy. And I think that piece around being able to hear the word no, being able to receive feedback, it goes both ways. Quite often that stuff is very short term. It keeps us safe in the short term. It keeps people happy in the short term. But as you say, if you're suddenly then on a performance review or something and you're like, no one told me about this, I didn't have a chance to amend it because no one shared that information with me. We know that people have blind spot. We do need to share that, especially as leaders. Yeah, I suppose the thing that I've noticed a lot is the leaders I work with tend to be really collaborative and often have quite a coaching approach in their leadership, or they want to have more of a coaching approach in their leadership. So it's how do you differentiate and distinguish between that wanting to collaborate, wanting to make sure everybody has an opportunity? How do you distinguish between the two? I think you've
Mm.
touched on that, but can you say a little bit more about that?
I think that's really hard because that's the tends to be the first thing that comes out of clients' mouths when you ask them, to kind of to go deeper, to say more about it. That's my style. It's my leadership. I'm a servant leader. I'm compassionate. I want collaboration. So that's why I do things in this way. So it often takes some unpacking to differentiate what is genuinely a helpful collaborative style and what is stepping over the boundary because it comes from a place of an unmet need
Yeah,
in
yeah.
in ourselves or in the leaders system, in the leaders world, which is why it's so important to go a little bit deeper underneath the surface. And the lead up to this, we were talking about how do you change this, adapt these behaviors. And I think the only way to do it is to explore the surface level behavior and to go deeper to understand the meaning of it. Where is it coming from? Why is it
Mm.
important to you that this person thinks positively of you? Or why do you think that if you do that, they will think more of you than if you do that? And let's unpack the assumptions that are sitting underneath that. Are you assuming that if you don't meet their needs right now, they will think what exactly? And how likely is that? But that's another point. What you're asking about is how do you tell the difference? Maybe I'm shirking it because I don't know the answer. But I think there's something about the price and the prize of it. So there's something about, like you said, the short term relief
Mm.
versus the long term gain. So in the case of taking a difficult decision, implementing a new initiative that people are not going to like because it's going to require them to work harder. But in the short term, it's going to be very unpopular, and you're going to be quite unpopular because people are already stretched, they're already working really hard, they're already telling you that their well-being is suffering, and you're going to ask them on top of that to be more meticulous about taking the register in a school so that you've got better attendance, and where you don't have good attendance, so you can be very targeted with how you support specific students, as an example. You know that's the right thing to do for your organization. So a people pleaser might compromise, soften the edges, might not put in place any punitive consequences if the intervention's not implemented properly, or might go a little softly around it so people feel more comfortable with it. And then the outcome is that it doesn't work because people don't do it. In that case, if you're driven by the need not to upset people, which in the short term is going to serve you, but in the long term, it's not going to serve you or them or the children or the organization, then you've probably got a case of people pleasing. So thinking about the price and the prize of the decisions that you're making in the short long term can help to really identify some of that.
Yes, I think that's really helpful, that way of looking at it. Maybe another way of looking at it is what is the intention? What is this behavior serving? Is it serving the vision for the organization? As a leader, you've got to be really connected to that and the mission and the values. It's that kind of external sort of looking up and out, where are we going? Or is it exactly what you said about that unmet need? There's something in you that is driving this behavior to keep you safe. It's very internal, looking inwards. Even if some of this stuff is not conscious either, is it? These are ways that we're wired and that we've learnt to behave, and it can take quite a lot of time to un unwire, rewire.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's part of being human. Again, it is one of the things, one of the aspects of being human and how we've evolved to keep ourselves safe, as you say, that gets in the way of our leadership. But it also has served us.
Mm.
So we continue to do it. And that's why we have people pleasers in leadership because it has served us. It helps us to be popular, to be liked, for people to want to be around us, to want to be in our presence. Therefore, we hold on to it and we perpetuate those habits that serve us. The trouble is when we get into the higher levels of leadership, it has a shadow in every layer, but it has a bigger shadow the higher you go up because as you become more responsible for more things, for more people, there's a limit to how much you can control and how many people you can please. So I
Yeah.
suppose when microcosm is tighter and smaller, it's easier to stay on top of that. But when you start to see that actually I can't control this anymore, then that tends to be the point at which people come to coaching or bring it up in their coaching as an issue. But I guess the other telltale sign, again, is an internal one, which are the emotions that might come when our attempts to people please don't quite work. So when we feel resentful and angry and frustrated, where we feel like we're taking care of everyone else and no one is taking care of us, nobody sees us as human. You know, the leaders who people only see the bad, they only see when the leaders are fallible or they don't live up to these unrealistic expectations. That's when people notice. But they don't notice when they're keeping a steady ship. Everything is flowing really well. There are no issues to speak of. Meanwhile, the leader's over there paddling underneath the surface, keeping everything nice. And so there can be these feelings of, what more do they want from me? That's all I ever do is take care of everyone. And now they're coming to complain about this tiny little thing, you know, when surveys come through. And
Yes, 99% amazing, and then the one thing.
yeah, so those might be some signs that the behaviors might be tipping more into people pleasing than into collaborative leadership. But I really don't think it's easy. It does need to be looked at on an individual case by case basis, because even the strongest people pleaser, perhaps like you and I, might not be able to notice what we're doing until we have a moment to sit back and unpack it, either on our own or with someone listening to us.
Yeah, because even knowing this stuff, there are moments where, like, I take something to my coaching supervision and I'm talking about it, and as I'm talking out loud and I'm being asked questions, the penny is dropping, but you haven't seen it because you're so close to it. So being able to have that space where you can build some self-awareness or unpick a little bit. As you were talking, I was also thinking about our individual experiences in the way we navigate life, childhood and expectations, all of those sorts of things. I also wonder, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, but I was also thinking about bigger narratives around women, kindness. I think people pleasing often gets conflated with kindness. That was certainly my experience. I'm a kind person, therefore shall give all of me, and then feeling resentful afterwards. I just wonder if there's that. Also noticing this is my experience of life. These are the stories that I have and the beliefs that I have, but also there are these external stories that we internalize. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, loads. And will we ever really know if the way we feel and the beliefs that we have to do with our individual experiences growing up or any trauma that we might have experienced, big T, little t, or if it is societal, conditional, environmental, all of that. I think it's a hodgepodge. There's certainly loads of people have written about this. Ironically, I'm thinking of one book written by two people, a man and a woman. And I can only remember the man's name, which is terrible, isn't it? On this topic. How Women Rise. Marshall Goldsmith and Sally Rose. We'll find the
And put the link in the show notes.
yeah.
How Women Rise. I haven't read that.
It's really good, and it's all about the internal barriers. It doesn't negate the fact that there are external environmental factors that get in women's way in terms of traditional definitions of success and climbing the corporate ladder. But it also looks at the internal beliefs and ways in which we can self-sabotage. It talks a lot about the conditioning of the external environment.
Mm.
I don't think we'll ever necessarily be able to unpick all of them. We've all got a little bit of this in us. From my experience, I haven't yet met anybody who doesn't have any of this in them, and it manifests in lots of different ways. I think that's because we're a social species, right? We
Yeah.
need each other to survive. There's danger in being controversial, being different and standing out because we've decided to do something that is unpopular or speak up about an issue where we're going against the majority voice. I think it's deeply ingrained in being human that we need each other to survive physically. That's part of our drivers.
And that means there will always be conflict. How do we navigate that with healthy boundaries rather than porous boundaries where We're giving a lot of ourselves, trying to make everyone happy. You mentioned well-being earlier. A leader trying to take responsibility for everybody's well-being and make sure everyone's happy. That's been interesting, particularly since the pandemic. People are more willing to talk about well-being, and that's amazing. Who is responsible for it? And if you are a leader who does have people-pleasing tendencies and you are holding responsibility for how everybody in your team is feeling, that's a lot, isn't it? I think what I notice is that some people tend to beat themselves up over it. "Oh, I'm a leader, I should have figured this out by now. Why am I doing this? It's so annoying." They know that it takes up a lot of their time thinking about it, doing things for people, so they know that it's not quite working, but they haven't quite figured it out yet, and I suppose this is why coaching is so brilliant, isn't it? Because it's that space where you can try and figure it out, but also to encourage and to cultivate that self-compassion that we are human, we are all human. Yeah. I I suppose the other thing I was thinking about is how do you say you've become aware, you know that you've got people-pleasing tendencies, you know that it's been having a detrimental effect on maybe team performance, on people's well-being, on your own well-being. How do you start creating those healthier boundaries and maybe do less people-pleasing? What can you do? Tell us.
It's the golden question, really. And I wish I had a silver bullet, but I don't. This is such a coaching answer. Please don't assume that it's a cop out. But I do think it will look different for different people in terms of what works for them. I think that going back to what we were saying earlier, you need a combination of really clear intentions and habits that you want to follow so that you can notice when you're falling into pattern, be able to practice noticing that, coming back, choosing the alternative option that is going to serve you better. So there's a process about thinking about what that looks like. How do these people pleasing tendencies show up where they're not serving you? And what process do you want to take that will be different next time? All of this requires in the moment presence or not. It requires reflection at some point. So it requires being able to notice that's where you're going and ideally just put a little bit of distance between you and the decision so that you create a little bit of space to have that reflective practice. We're not saying you need to over labor it, but it's just that micro pause in between the ask and the reaction.
Mm.
You can turn the reaction into a response. This is a lot of the themes we talk about on Inside Out on the Resilient Leadership program that I run with some colleagues. And it's building that ability to know yourself really well, know your patterns, how they show up, and to develop the ability to be present in the moment so you can catch them. It's all well and good knowing yourself, but if you can't catch them, sometimes you've gone too far or you have to backtrack and go back again. Ideally, it's better if you can catch it in the moment. If you can't catch it in the moment, you catch it later, great. You can reflect on it later and then you can go back. So I think you need that piece, the really intentional, practical thinking around the old and the new and what you're moving towards. But I don't think that's enough. I think you do need to go underneath the surface and unpack where it comes from. So there's a to your understanding of the drivers, the beliefs, the why. I don't want to say no to Sarah to record the podcast, but let's say that I did want to say no
Yeah.
to record the podcast. I don't want to say no to her. Why is that? Well, I want to maintain that relationship. That relationship's really important to me. Okay, so you're assuming that if you say no to recording a podcast with Sarah, that's going to sever the relationship that you have with her. Is that true? In what way is that true? And if you said no, what might happen next? And why is it important to you that you don't sever that relationship with Sarah? Oh, well, because I like her and I want her to like me. And so you try and unpack what's sitting underneath it. Quite often, when you get to the root of it, is I want her to see me as a good person. And if she sees me as a good person, then that means I am a good person. Phew,
Mhm.
that's a relief.
Oh, and I'm not gonna be kicked out the cave and
Yeah.
eaten. I often help people to think about some stock phrases they can come up with or a stock email response. to
Mm.
give them a bit of time before saying the yes, if we're talking about saying yes and saying no, but, being able to say, "Oh, let me have a think about it." Something as simple as that. "Let me have a think about it. I'll get back to you in an hour," just so that they can then do some of that work. And the reflection, I read something. There was a study that said if leaders reflect for about 15 minutes a day, performance improves by, I think it's something like 25 to 28%. Just from that reflection, being able to stop, take a minute, think what went well, what might have I done differently? And yeah, then having that time, whether it's therapy, coaching, walking with a trusted friend, or even journaling, sometimes having a list of those questions as a way of just checking in. What is the thing that's stopping me or pushing me in that direction? What and you start to notice patterns then, don't you? That, oh, hang on a minute. I've done that in the past and I'm thinking about that in the future as well.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me, that statistic, actually. It's a brilliant statistic. I believe in that wholeheartedly because we live in such a fast paced, high pressured world at the moment. A lot of people put it down to COVID. I'm not sure if it is COVID or advancement of tech, but it feels like the expectations we have of ourselves and each other now and in organizations are unrealistic. You know, absolutely unrealistic. We are striving to do more with less all the time. And the answer, for the most part, is just work harder, right? Just work hard, just another hour, just
Yeah.
another.
Harder, longer.
Yeah. And so what happens is that we enter into a state of hyperactivity, automaticity, autopilot, driven, doing, striving, busy. The more I can tick off my list, the better off I will be. I won't drown. I can't possibly take another hour because then
Mm.
emails are going to pile up. In that context and in that mode, it feels almost impossible to step back and think. We compromise the quality of our engagement with people, quality of our presence with people. The key is in that pause. The key is in that moment of awareness, present, reflecting back and reflecting forward. And it doesn't have to be long.
No.
Even just pausing for a minute before you go into a meeting and asking yourself, what is my deepest intention in this meeting? How do I want to be in
Mm.
this meeting? That can help for people pleasing, can help for all sorts of things. What's most important to me about this meeting?
Yeah, because I mean, we're constantly in that go, make, buy, sell state of urgency. Our nervous systems are so dysregulated. And when our nervous systems are dysregulated, then we can't, well, it's not that we can't, but those healthy boundaries, those practical solutions that you spent time talking to your coach about can't be accessed as easily because you're just in that we've just got to keep going because if I stop, there might not be safety here. Um,
I
and
might
it
fail.
I might fail, and if I fail, people are gonna think I'm rubbish at my job, and if I'm rubbish at my job, they're not gonna like me, and then if I'm not liked,
Yeah. Who am I?
yeah, there are some really great. I do spend a lot of my time recommending books and podcasts because I do think in a practical sense for people to, if this is a subject and that they've, or if they've been listening to our conversation and lots of bells are going off going ting ting ting, this, yes, that sounds like me, then I'd really recommend reading quite widely, not just on people pleasing but also in terms of like how you want to spend your time and your life. So I was thinking about the Oliver Burkeman book, 4,000 Weeks,
Yes.
because he talks about that sense of urgency and always trying to tick everything off the list and be as productive as humanly possible. And he's got this really beautiful quote which talks about getting over this belief, this lie that says that we can do it all, and get it all done before we leave this world. Letting go of that limiting belief that we're ever going to get everything done. I think that can be really helpful with people pleasing tendencies as well, because, it may, well, talking from my own experience, I want to have a certain life, I want to be a certain way. And the people pleasing really stops me from getting any of that. Reading books like that really help to motivate me to keep going. Because I think when you're trying to change a behavior as well and then you get it wrong, it's that beating up again. Oh, there's no point. I'm never going to change. But finding your own inspiration that's going to help you to keep going and keep practicing and have that self compassion. Yeah,
Yes.
that feels important to me.
Agreed. Absolutely. You need to come at it in different ways, different angles at different times, right? So reading books, lots of different books will talk about similar themes, but in a different way. And so you'll hear it articulated by Brene Brown in one way, and then Kristen Neff will have a different take, but you're all talking about the same core thing.
Yeah.
Reading widely, listening to podcasts, and having your own process, and that practicing self compassion when you fall off the wagon. I think of it as grooves. Old grooves are really deep. And so the tendency will be to fall back into them. Imagine you're on a bike. The bike is going to go in path of least resistance. So that'll be the old groove. But as you're trying to form a new habit or a new way of thinking or a new paradigm or perspective on something, you're trying to create a new groove and it's next to the other one and it's different. It's that repetition over and over again that's going to help to start to make it deeper and deeper. Inevitably, sometimes you're going to fall back into the old groove because it's there, it's
Mhm.
deeper and it's easier and there's less resistance.
Mhm.
Clearly, when we're stressed and hypervigilance, on high alert, worried for our safety, worried for our performance. But we can always notice that and go, oh, there we go again, as we do in supervision. Oh, that again.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I thought I was done with that one. Just an old groove. Yeah.
I
Um,
love that. I'm really gonna steal that. Thank you so much, Val. And also that relates to the neuroscience, doesn't it? And how we can our brains are able to create new neuro pathways. They can be molded. I find that stuff really helpful and hopeful. But the other thing I was thinking about was having an accountability partner, someone who you trust who might be able to help you know having someone going, is the pleaser showing up again? You find your own way of doing it, but humor and a friend who can just very gently challenge, or a colleague, can be really helpful just to go, oh yeah, there she is again, there's that good girl, there's that people pleaser. I find that helpful.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love giving it a persona or a name or a color or a whatever. We do this a lot in coaching. It comes from IFS, from the field of therapy, the idea that we are a multitude of parts and we can notice a part that's been there to protect us. We can give it a shape, a name, and a texture, and notice when it's popping up because it's been there for a long time and it's really
Mm.
present. But then we might be delivering or developing another part that might be quieter. And we might want to say, hey, I've heard enough from you. Thank you very much. What's the other one got to say? If I were to listen to that, what would that part say? It might be like an inner coach or an inner critic, people pleaser part. You might give it a name.
I do, and you've also, I mean, there's so many of these exercises that you can do to really help yourself get a bit of distance from this. There's another one where you can imagine that you have a sort of boardroom in your mind and it's which member of the board is speaking right now, and you can, yeah, give them characters and think about where they come from, and sometimes you have to say thank you very much. Let's say John, so, thank you John for helping, but actually we need to hear from everybody now. But that's sort of, again, like humor, playfulness, holding it lightly, not trying to completely change yourself, because sometimes there is that feeling of, oh, this is a bad thing about me and I need to get rid of it. But
Mhm.
by playing with it, and holding it lightly and having a bit of fun, we can have fun with
Mhm.
this stuff as well.
Yeah. Yeah. You gave me the thought of the accountability buddy and who that might be. And then I thought, I've got loads. They haven't been designated as such intentionally, I guess. The supervision space is a good one. Mm. Where it can be playful and joyful and fun. And then friends. And I suppose we don't really have colleagues as such, other than we have associates and people that we work with. For me, it's different people for different things rather than actually having a solid team of colleagues. But when you're in a leadership role, you'll have some of that, won't you? And you'll have your execs. Actually, I think that's probably one of the most vulnerable, powerful things you can do as a leader is to be really open and honest about the things that you're working on and invite your team to help you with them. A CEO who stands in front of the doesn't have to stand up, maybe they're sitting there. Yep. But who's
A PowerPoint presentation.
and it has a caricature and everything. I recognize that I have a people-pleasing tendency, and I'm really trying to work on that, and I'm giving more timely, constructive feedback. I'm finding it hard, but I would really appreciate it if you could help me with that. So if you could notice or
Mm,
ask a question to help me notice when I'm doing that, I'd be really grateful. What
yeah.
kind of what kind of environment would a leader like that create in that team?
And that takes a lot of courage, I think, particularly for a people pleaser, because that means that people might be watching and giving feedback, noticing some of those patterns. But having a courageous leader who can be that vulnerable could be massively powerful. One of the thoughts that I had earlier was when you're working on this and trying to implement changes and create that new groove for yourself, that can be quite disconcerting for other people as well. If you're starting to create healthier boundaries, you're saying no more, you're giving space to thinking, you're reflecting more, you're being more assertive, then that's other people around you who might have worked with you for a long time can think, what's going on? That can have an impact on them as well. So I think that openness, you don't need to share all the personal stuff, but the openness of saying, I'm working on this, you might notice I'm doing things a bit differently. That can also be helpful because it sets up that change that some people might feel quite disconcerted by.
Yes, yes. I love that. It serves so many different purposes, doesn't it? One being it's going to be a bit weird for people when you start to try and operate a little bit differently. So how clear can you be about that? We use the word contracting in coaching, don't we? How do you set the agreement of how you're going to be working with people and not just the to-do lists and the action points, but how are we going to show up for each other as we do this work together that is so important.
Mm.
One of the things that's important to me is that I want to try and find, okay, let's take a situation of a rescuer driven by people pleasing. Somebody comes to you in a bit of a flap because they have too much on and they can't meet the deadlines and they don't know how to do this one thing because you care about your people and can see that they're overwhelmed and you want to hold on to them because you don't want them to burn out and leave. You say, okay, don't worry. It's okay. I'll do it. You go and focus over here and I'll do it. And you do that 3 or 4 times and suddenly you've got way too much work to do. So you might share with your team that you've noticed you have a tendency to jump in and rescue, but you also know that's quite disempowering for other people. And that actually a healthier conversation about, okay, there's too much on. What needs to change for this to be possible? What can we do about the rest of your portfolio? Are there things that need to be delayed, managed expectations, whatever, so that you can balance and spin these plates? In return, what I need from you is that you come to me ready to have that conversation and willing to say, at the moment, this is too much. I can do this, but I will need X, Y, and Z, or your support to have that conversation with that person to manage those expectations so that I can focus my attention over here.
Mm.
We rarely have the conversation about the conversation,
Yeah.
right? We have that kind of, what do I need from you to be at my best? What do you need from me to be at your best? Do we need from each other so that this partnership and this collaboration is going to be the best that it can be?
Mm.
And I think to your point, that can be a helpful part of the process to changing some of those habits.
Yeah. And actually, that's truly collaborative.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if I say I'm a collaborative leader, but what I mean by that, because I'm driven by people pleasing, is that I will take on lots of different people's tasks to get stuff done. I will take on the feedback from above because things aren't being done by my team, everyone's overstretched. But that to me is collaborative. That's a lie, isn't it? That's not collaborative. It's exactly what you've just been talking about. That's truly collaborative. What do we need, all of us? What are my needs? What are your needs? What are the external stakeholder needs? How do we meet all of those needs for everybody?
Very adult to adult, isn't it? Issue. The problem is we're so rarely in that state where we're in the hustle and the bustle and the moving forward and the speed and the urgency. Those conversations feel like a waste of time.
Yeah. Until you start having them and then you see the difference.
Yes. Another quote, I can't remember. 80% of communication is mopping up previous bad communication. So much time fixing because we didn't take the time to be really clear about expectations, about how we're going to work together, about what we need, about in the long run. We spend way more time trying to resolve misunderstandings and assumptions.
Okay. We could do about a 10-hour podcast on this. So I'm going to start wrapping up. If someone's listening to this, what's the one thing they could do right now that could help them move forward?
Yeah. I always hesitate with the one thing, but there is one thing that I think is probably the starting point, and that has to be noticing. Start with getting really curious about patterns, tendencies, etc. There's a tool that we use on Inside Out, the pathway to resilient leadership. And it's a tool we keep coming back to because it's the basis of regulated, adult, responsive frame of mind. So it all can be wrapped up into that. It seems simple and it is a simple tool, but it has lots of depth to it. Called the 5 Cs. And it is built on the idea that was first shared by David Noble and Carol Kaufman in Time Leadership. It's called NHBR. We've applied it to all sorts of different concepts and areas of leadership. So the idea is that you can use it anytime. You can use it as a diagnostic to center yourself and reflect in the moment, what is going on for me? And you can use it before making a decision, before entering into a meeting. You can use it with your team as a piece of contracting. It goes like this: 5 questions, 5 Cs. How calm am I? Is my nervous system regulated? Am I thinking with my prefrontal cortex, or am I in hypervigilance, operating from my emotional center, my sympathetic nervous system, etc.? Rank yourself on a scale from 1 to 5.
Mhm.
How calm am I? How clear am I? What is my deepest intention? What is my purpose? How do I want to show up? What's important about this conversation? What message do I want to get across? How clear am I? Again, scale of 1 to 5. How curious am I? What kind of assumptions am I making? Am I really open to changing my mind, to being challenged? How curious am I? 1 to 5. How courageous am I? How willing am I to say the stuff that needs to be said that might be hard to hear? So that's really one for the people pleasers. How courageous am I being right now? And how compassionate am I?
Love these.
So use them at any time to ground yourself, to get off the hamster wheel, to get into parasympathetic system where we are our prefrontal cortex, where we do all of our rational thinking, where our logical brain is switched on, so that we can engage from a place of logic and rationality and purpose, back to our values, back to what's important to us. Then just by doing the diagnostic, it will be very clear where you need to lean in. If you're making loads of assumptions about the other person, what they'll think of you, why they're underperforming, the fact that they're not good at their job or they can't work fast enough, then you won't be being very curious. You'll probably be 1 or 2. So that will tell you, okay, lean into a bit of curiosity, see what comes up if you stop assuming or challenge your assumption.
And I guess even the act of stopping and answering those questions starts to calm you down, starts to get you clearer that you're already working towards that. So calm, clear, curious, courageous, compassionate. Yeah, lovely. Tell us a little bit about the Inside Out leadership?
Mm. It's my third or fourth baby. I have two human babies, a dog, and a program. It's a program that my co-founder, Maggie Farah, and I built because we felt there was a gap in terms of leadership development that came from the inner world of leaders, that was about them as human beings, what drives them, what gets in the way that is part of being human. There are a million programs on how to delegate, manage finances, how to carry out one-to-ones, performance manage people, and so on. But there is nothing we have found that is more tailored towards the person, the individual. So back to my passion about humans. But
Mm.
Becky is a trained mindfulness teacher as well as practitioner, and I have my own mindfulness practice. We've been working together for years in the education sector primarily, but now we have branched out to work with leaders in all sectors. Inside Out is the combination of that relationship and thinking. It's a program over 4 months, accessible in terms of cost and time because overly ambitious. It structures you through a process of getting to know yourself better, getting to know your armor, what you do when you're in fear. We build on the work of Brene Brown, understanding how that shows up in your leadership and how that erodes you, the overthinking, the ruminating, the busyness, the constant striving, whatever that is for you. As we build our self awareness and leaders' self awareness, we also build our ability to be present in the moment. So, through the mindfulness practices. So, it's a combination of insights from coaching, models from psychology. You use lots of transactional analysis to help people to understand themselves well and to then be able to notice in the moment and proactively choose how they respond as opposed to being in autopilot.
Yeah.
That's it in a nutshell. And when you do that, you can let go of things outside of your control. You can focus on what's most important. You can place your attention on your intention, on your purpose. And that all builds resilience and helps to sustain you in a world that is gone mad in terms of expectations and so
Yeah, yeah, that sounds amazing and very much needed. I think that piece about mindfulness, if we're thinking about the practical ways, in order to notice, building a mindfulness practice can be really helpful. If you're listening and you're thinking, I don't know about that mindfulness, there are loads of brilliant teachers out there who will break down some of those myths around mindfulness. I think there's a yeah, anyway, including my own mindfulness teacher, I'm going to give her a shout out, Dr. Karen Smith. She's just amazing. If you can cultivate that noticing and mindfulness and knowing what are the things that show up for you, that sounds an amazing program. Thank you for sharing. And if people want to find you, connect with you, how do they do that? What's the best way?
thank you. Yeah. So LinkedIn is the best way. I don't do Twitter or whatever it's called, X. I don't do Facebook. I don't do Instagram. I'm very boundaried with my social media. So I do apologize. If you're not on LinkedIn, you can contact me through the website, astridkorin.com. And on the website, there's a button, connect with me and have a chat. And yeah, I write a lot because writing helps me think through my ideas. So there are loads of blogs on the website and a little bit less frequent than I would like, but I do also post on LinkedIn as regularly as I can. So you can find me there, click follow, and hopefully you'll find something that's useful and helpful to you.
I will put all of the links in the show notes so you can go to those and find Astrid, or go to my LinkedIn profile and you'll find Astrid through that as well. We are also going to be doing a LinkedIn Live, which I hope will be a couple of days after this podcast gets released. If you are listening around the, what date did we say, 23rd of March, then come onto LinkedIn and we're going to do a little bit of a follow up. Or if you are listening after that, it will be recorded on LinkedIn, so you can do that too. Thank you, Astrid. There's been so much to take away. I'm definitely stealing your grooves. We'll find all the quotes and people who said things and put those in the show notes. But thank you so much. It's been a really brilliant conversation.
Thank you, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me. I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Hello. What did you find useful in that conversation? What resonated? I would really love to hear. I do love hearing from people who listen to these episodes. You can come and find me on LinkedIn. I'm at Sarah Fox Coach. Or you can sign up to my weekly letter to founders and leaders, people who are striving to make the world a better place, but they don't want to break in the process. I send a letter every week talking about all sorts of things that will help you, giving you some coaching questions and tips and tools, just some ideas for inspiration. So if that sounds like your thing, you can click on the link in the show notes and sign up. Take very good care.